Welcome to this evening's event. Thank you to all who have joined us. If you're with us earlier, I did mention that we have well over 1,000 registrations for tonight's event. And so we're so pleased to have so many parents, community members with us here this evening for this very important conversation. This evening, the Parent Engagement Series event is entitled How to Talk to Your Children About Anti-Black Racism. I just want to quickly give you a little overview of the question and answer period. So you know that on your screen there is a box for questions and answers. We encourage you throughout Bee's presentation this evening to pose questions, and we will do our best to answer a few of those questions. We're going to try to consolidate questions into about 5 or 6 questions. You do have an option to like questions that might already be in the question and answer section, which will, if you like them, it'll populate similar questions so we can see the top 5 questions that participants are interested in hearing. So we thank you so much for that. And we hope that most of the questions and answers can really be directed towards our guest speaker this evening, because we know that she has so much information to share with us, and we want to ensure that we use our time together wisely. So we ask you to continue to ask those questions throughout, and we have members of the team behind the scenes, so we'll be supporting those answers as well. I'd like just to take a quick moment to introduce myself. Anin Bozo, Erin Indigenous, Oshawa Donjaba, Anishinaabe Kwe, Minwa Jaganosh Kwe, and Dao. My name is Erin Almperst, and I'm the superintendent who has the privilege of working alongside the Parent Involvement Committee, who has brought this evening to you tonight. So we thank you so much for being here with us. And it is my pleasure at this time to introduce you to Valerie Estridge, who is the chair of the Parent Involvement Committee, to get our evening started. So Valerie, I'll pass it on over to you.
Thank you so much, Erin. All right, now for the land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our schools and school boards are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. I will now read the Human Rights and Equity Statement. The Durham District School Board is committed to learning environments that are safe, welcoming, respectful, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and free from discrimination, while placing human rights and equity at the center. At this time, it's my privilege to welcome our director. As an advocate for public education for almost 30 years, Director Norah Marsh has worked with Ontario's education community to strengthen students' achievement and well-being at the school, board, and provincial levels. She has a strong commitment to community and have worked with community partners to build integrated knowledge networks that support students and families. Please help me welcome Director Norah Marsh, who will provide our opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Val, and welcome to the second Parent Engagement Series event of the 2020-2021 school year, How to Talk to Your Children About Anti-Black Racism. Valerie, want to thank you and the members of the Parent Engagement Series Steering Committee for making this evening's essential conversation possible. Appreciate the efforts in engaging our community, especially during a pandemic. I'm pleased to be here on Pink Shirt Day, a day that originated from homophobic and transphobic bullying. And it's an important day for us all to stand up and say that we stand up against bullying. And so wanted to acknowledge that day as well at the beginning of our evening together. I'm genuinely thrilled that so many DDSB parents, community members, and staff have come together to engage in collective learning as a community this evening about how we can effectively engage in critical conversations with children about anti-Black racism. Erin mentioned at the outset that we have over 1,100 families registered here this evening, which is definitely one of our most popular evenings. And we're just thrilled to be welcoming you into this learning community. This is an essential conversation for all of us. Within our schools and classrooms, students learn about and acknowledge the realities of anti-Black racism and engage in critical conversations. They have witnessed tragic events in the media and often want to unpack these events and continue meaningful conversations at home. For some, these conversations are deeply related to their daily lived experiences, and for others, they are learning to recognize and respond to injustices. Tonight, acclaimed public speaker, writer, social media influencer, and most especially DDSB parent, B. Kwame, will support us in our collective journey, providing practical tips on how we talk to our children about anti-Black racism in a way that can support much needed social change and make a difference right now. We're proud to launch the Addressing Anti-Black Racism and Its Impact, a well-being toolkit for families, which is being developed to provide racially competent resources for Black families. We believe that its contents will also benefit all communities seeking a greater understanding of the impact of anti-Black racism. DDSB's commitment to anti-Black racism strategy has been communicated clearly through the release of our Compendium of Action for Black Student Success. The 8 strategies outlined within that document exist within the context of the importance of how we need to respond to the social and cultural realities of families. We are committed to establishing real and sustainable change through the building of relationships with parents and community and addressing systemic issues. We look forward to engaging and learning alongside parents and communities this evening for the essential conversation that we know tonight is only a part of the journey and that we will continue to move forward. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to learning with you this evening.
Miigwech, Director Marsh, for beginning our evening in a good way. So thank you so much for being here with us. I just want to take a moment again to explain the question and answer box on your screen. So please feel free, as B is sharing with us this evening, to share questions that you might have for B related to what she's speaking to us about. We will then take the top 5-ish approximately questions to bring to B to answer them for you. There is also a little like button. So if there's a question that's been posed that you really feel you'd like it to be answered, please feel free to check with the like button. And then all of the top questions will kind of raise to the top for the group in the background that is working to answer questions. We'll also really try to answer any specific questions you might have around timing, different things like that. If you have questions around the work we're doing in the DDSB or other things that come up, we will take an opportunity to look at one of those questions together, as well as the approximately 5 questions we send to B. Any remaining questions, we want to make sure we're really responsive and we answer those remaining questions, because all questions are really important. So we will be, as a team, consolidating the questions that are asked that we don't get to, and be connecting through email with all participants to share answers to the questions that we're perhaps not able to answer this evening. We also know that this is our first conversation and that there will be many conversations to come, and we will come back together and address some of those conversations as we move forward, as this today is only the starting point of the conversations we know we need to have together. So at this time, I'll pass it over to one of the co-chairs of the committee for this evening, Frank Samuels, to introduce our guest speaker.
Hi, everybody. It is with great pleasure that I introduce Ms. B. Kwame to you this evening. B is a writer, radio host, and public speaker She has a degree in health sciences from Western University and has spent over a decade in the healthcare industry before she transitioned to writing and media. Bea has written for many publications, including the Globe and Mail, Men's Health, Today's Parent, Maclean's, and many more. She's the co-host of the global news radio show, The Cultured Show, and has been a featured panelist and commentator on City TV's Cityline, CBC's The National, and TVO's The Agenda with Steve Paikin. Bea regularly writes and speaks to the topics of race and culture, parenting, mental health, and much more. And in addition to all of this, as Director Marsh said, Bea is a parent of the Durham District School Board, where she resides with her 2 daughters. Tonight, Bea will be guiding all of us as to how to speak to our children about anti-Black racism. What more fitting of a topic in the midst of Black History Month and given the tumultuous experiences of this past year. Bea's keynote will be followed by a Q&A, and given the size of our audience, as Erin Elmhurst said, we want to acknowledge that we will not be able to answer every question this evening, but we will record them and get back to you with answers just as soon as we can. Without further ado, Ms. Bea Kwame.
Thank you so much for that wonderful welcome. It's always interesting because I do a lot of public speaking and I often provide my bio, but it's always a great moment of reflection for me to actually hear it back to myself and remember, yeah, you actually do all of that stuff. I just feel like I go. So it's a nice moment of reflection to actually take a second to sit back and think about the work that I've done that's led me to this moment, joining all of you tonight. So I am very thrilled to be here and really honored to be able to kind of kick off some of these discussions and bring this topic to you around speaking to children about anti-Black racism. And again, with the understanding that this is going to be an ongoing conversation, there is no way I'm going to be able to explain or solve everything in this evening, but I'm really looking forward to this journey of speaking with you all and seeing what comes of it. So I've got a presentation. I'm just going to share my screen quickly and we will get going with that. All right, wonderful. Here we go. So how to talk to your kids about anti-Black racism. The first thing I want to do is, oh, just give me one moment. There we go. Just do a quick little additional intro of who I am and kind of how I've gotten here. So as you heard before, I am a writer. That's kind of my my main thing. As a kid, I loved to write, and in grade 1 or 2, I won a writing competition at school, and I got to have lunch with Robert Munsch, who was and still is one of my absolute favorite children's book authors. And he read the story that I wrote, and he told me it was amazing, and I was 100% sold that this is it. I'm going to be a writer. This is going to be my job for life. And took me a bit of a detour to actually get back to this place. But this is something that I've loved to do, storytelling and telling stories that haven't been shared before and finding ways to amplify new ways of thinking through my writing has been really important. Again, I'm also co-host on a radio show called The Cultured Show on Global News Radio 640 Toronto that airs every Saturday at 8 p.m. And myself and my co-host, who's a woman of Indian descent, we speak on topics around kind of the, hot pop culture of the week or just big news items of the week from the perspective of 2 women of color. In addition, we get to interview a lot of amazing people, great celebrities who are able to come to the city or now virtually whenever we can get in touch with people through Zoom, and also local folks who are doing great work who maybe have never been given the platform to share the work that they're doing. I think a highlight last year in terms of interviews was interviewing Anika Noni Rose, who's an amazing actress and who did the voice of Princess Tiana. So for my children, I was mom of the month, basically, after they heard me speak to Princess Tiana, all thanks to my work on the radio show. Now I get to do some TV as well and do different television appearances, different panels on parenting, and then like you heard around race and culture. So this is something that has led to my mother calling me a professional big mouth when she's trying to consolidate all of the things that I do. Being on TV and being able to share my opinions really kind of sealed the deal for her with that. And like I'm doing tonight, I do a lot of public speaking. I speak to everything from groups of junior kindergarten students up to graduate students, companies and organizations of different sizes and in different industries. And again, on kind of the topics that I specialize in around writing, storytelling, social media, online life, health and wellness, race and culture, feminism, parenting, all different types of things. So it's a very much a mixed bag. And this again gives me the opportunity to kind of bring my work and these discussions to a different audience in a different medium. And probably most importantly, as you've heard, I am a mother of 2 young girls. So my eldest is Layla, she is 6 years old, and my little one is Zuri, she's 3. So she will be getting into JK in September, which I cannot believe. But you know, being a mother is not only important to my work in terms of motivating me to continue to push further and do more and be able to show them a different way of being a working mom or a different way of chasing your dreams. That's a very kind of personal way of looking at it. But the broader way that they inspire me is through the work that I'm doing, like what we're doing here tonight, in ways to give back and in ways to ensure that in my decision to bring them into the world, I'm doing everything I can to make the world that I leave them with hopefully better than the one that they were birthed into. So conversations like the one tonight are extremely important for me because these will affect my children. For any parents and educators out there who have children or teach children in these in our district school board, these are important things because these are all going to affect our next generation. And I just look at this as my continued work as someone who chose to bring children into the world and who continues to do the work that I can to make that world better for them. So just to set some intentions for tonight, I think some great ones have already been set in terms of, you know, the breadth of this conversation is much wider than what we can allow in a, 45-minute chat with 15-minute Q&A. But what I really want to do is be able to have honest conversations with you all. I really want to introduce you to concepts that maybe you have never conceived of or thought of in your working life, or maybe never had the language for. Maybe it's something you felt, but never had the language to actually solidify it in your mind. I also want to be able to challenge people to think differently about things and to maybe poke and prod internally about why we do things the way we do sometimes and the work that we need to do to shift those things. And obviously the main goal is to help you meet your kids where they're at with these conversations. I think it's really important that this kind of goes in 2 ways. We want to be here to know what we need to say when our kids approach us or when we want to have those conversations, but that requires a lot of internal work that we all have to do within ourselves first. So those are just some intentions for tonight. And to just get things started a little bit, I have a quick poll of 2 questions if we can get that popped up on the screen, just 2 simple questions for folks that I would like everyone to answer just to kind of see where we're at in terms of where people are coming from and what experiences people have had. So if we can get those polls up, there we go. So the first question is, what age are your children or the children you work with? And you can answer multiple. And additionally, the second question is, to date, have you had any conversations about race or racism with your children? So I'll give folks maybe a minute or so to respond, and then we will end it, and then we'll populate and see what the results are looking like. It's great to see this view, having I've been bestowed a co-host role as well. So I'm not going to click any buttons other than my own presentation so that I don't kick you all out. But it's great to see that we've got almost everybody answered already. It hasn't even been a full minute. So feel free to jump in and put your answer in there. All right. This is looking good. Give it another few seconds. All right, there we go. So I hope everybody can see these results. So we've got about 62% of folks who've responded who either have children or are working with children who are between the ages of 6 and 10. obviously a really important age group when we're thinking about these conversations. And it's great to see about 92% of folks have already had some conversations about race or racism with their children or the children they work with. So this is really good information for me to kind of know where folks are coming from. And don't worry, we're going to kind of touch on things that will hopefully help people with children of different age ranges and as people are growing. And again, for folks who maybe have never had these conversations or are looking for new ways to do so, then I'm hoping that tonight helps as well. All right, so we can go ahead and close that poll. All right, okay, so let's continue here with these slides. Now, if we think about what do kids know about race, this is really interesting because I think that we very often underestimate children and what we think they can understand. So there was a study done, there's been multiple studies, but a report, parents.com, detailed some of these different things around different age groups and children's understanding of race. So between the ages of 6 months to 1 year, babies can recognize differences in hair textures and skin color. At 2 to 3 years old, kids become more vocal about noticing physical differences. Don't know if any parents out there have had some embarrassing incidents with that. I know I have, where my children have pointed things out and made their comments very loudly because they're getting the language and they're trying to exercise the language about the things that they see that are different and unique in the world. Between the ages of 4 and 6, kids begin to assign positive and negative attributes to physical traits. And the way this works is the positive attributes will be related to things that are similar to them. So if we're thinking phenotypically and what we see physically, then that relates to skin color, that relates to hair color and hair texture. Anything that is similar and common to them, it usually gets assigned something more positive. Things that are different begin to maybe get assigned things that are more negative, which is why it's really important that even though we think a child that is 4, 5, or 6 years old might not be able to have these types of conversations, it's really important that we kind of nip those things in the bud, because by the time we do have those conversations, if we've skipped this portion, kids are already assigning positive and negative attributes. And at ages 7 to 8, kids begin to understand that we can be different and alike at the same time. So I think that those concepts are really important to think about and really eye-opening for me, even when I was reading some of the numbers and the statistics and the research behind all of this, to understand that our children are often much more perceptive than we give them credit for, and maybe more perceptive than we're ready for, which is why part of this conversation around learning how to speak to our children about race, a lot of it rests with us as the parents and as the adults in their lives, getting more comfortable with these conversations so that we have these ways and we have this language to speak with them. Now, another thing that relates to that slide that I just put up is in regards to having what's called the talk. And Black parents out there might be very familiar with this. I'm familiar with it from the perspective of being a Black child, and now a parent myself, and thinking about the ways that this talk is coming out in the ways that I'm preparing my children for the world. So if you're not familiar, Black parents often have to prepare their children for the realities of racism at a young age, thinking of school interactions, behavior in public, getting older. Driving lessons was a big one, with interactions with police and basically how to survive these things. And it's really important that people recognize the privilege you may have had if you've never had to have that type of talk. If driver's ed is really just driver's ed for your child, and it doesn't come with the added conversation around what to do when you're pulled over by police, where to keep your hands, how to address the police officer, how to not make any sudden moves. Those are all different things that become additional labor that Black parents have to do. I think about my own children and thinking about an example, say, of when my eldest was about to get into junior kindergarten. We have a very Caribbean home. My background is Jamaican and their father's is Vincentian. So at home, we would speak patois and we would use different slang terms and different language to talk about things. And I started preparing my daughter to not use that language at school, because I didn't want it to seem like the assumption is she doesn't have strong English skills, or, you know, she's a little slower than children in her language skills because she is referring to things in the ways that we refer to them at home. And it was very sad to me to think about the fact that this is her culture, this is how we speak, but knowing that she was going to be stepping into an environment that didn't really reflect her culture at all, I had to prepare her for that and make sure she understood that there's ways that we speak when we're at home and there's ways that we speak when we are out and about. And what also was kind of very bitter to that is to think about the fact that, you know, if she was speaking French and if she went into JK and she was bilingual with French and English, she would likely be seen as brilliant. I look at patois as a language in and of itself, but it doesn't hold the same respect and the same weight because of race and culture and class issues as well. So there are all these different things that Black parents have to navigate, and we give these children these lessons at a very young age. So the other privilege to it is sometimes when people say, oh, my child is young, my child's only 6, my child's only 7 or 8, they're not ready to have conversations around race. At those ages, Black children have already been made well aware, either through these very direct conversations or through witnessing the things that have happened within their lived experience or within their families, to know that race is very real and very critical in their lives. So I think that we should consider that as we move forward, and consider that there are Black children who are learning about race, whether they want to or not. They're learning about what their place in the world means, whether they want to or not, because parents want them to survive. So I think that the way we can kind of equalize that, or start to minimize some of those stressful impacts, which I'll speak about a little bit later, is to ensure that everyone knows we can have these conversations. It just depends where you're at with it. But like the other slide was showing with the statistics and the science of children understanding different concepts around race, children are more ready than we think they are. And it's very important that we kind of get ahead of that than catching up once we hear something or see something that is a little bit concerning. Now, something that comes up very often is the idea of being colorblind. And this is generally a very well-intentioned approach to looking at the differences between folks and the differences of race and ethnicity, where the idea is to equalize all aspects. So whether you're white or whether you're Black, whether you're brown or any other, you know, racial combination, it doesn't matter. The idea of it not mattering in a negative connotation is important, and that means something very, very important and very well intentioned. But saying that you're colorblind actually does more damage than helping the situation. So when we say that we don't see color, we're kind of insinuating that race is something, you know, there's multiple ways of looking at it. We're insinuating that race is not a factor. We eliminate the realities of what race means in our society when we say that we don't see color. We minimize differences in people that they may be very proud of or that they may be excited to share by telling them that color and everything attached to color, race and culture and all of that doesn't matter. So we do a lot of harm with that. We miss out on the ability to have real conversations. We miss out on the ability to speak about the realities of the society that we're in right now and the ways that we move about the world depending on our race. We miss out on all of that, and we give our children a false pretense that does not prepare them for the real world. And this goes for everyone. This goes for maybe parents of color who want to talk about being colorblind, and then their child is stunned when there is something racial that happens if they have been kind of educated with this idea of color not mattering. But for white children as well, when they don't understand privilege and the ways that whiteness supports them in different ways, because we want to be colorblind, we're not arming them with anything to be able to make a difference and to make a change going forward as well. So being colorblind is usually well-intentioned, but it's very passive. So it's not an active behavior. We are not doing anything to push anti-racist practices forward by being colorblind. We're being very passive because we're just not speaking about it. We're just not talking about it. We're just saying that it doesn't matter. And that idea of being active or being passive is really important when we think about how we situate ourselves in this conversation around being non-racist versus being anti-racist. So I did a talk back in the fall, hosted by Durham College with Dr. Ibram Kendi, who is an amazing scholar and has written a number of books around looking at race and culture, particularly from an African-American perspective. And he's the author of the best-selling book, How to Be Anti-Racist. And we spoke about this concept of people who say, well, I'm not racist. I've never used a racial slur. I have friends of all colors and all backgrounds. My children hang out with people of all colors and backgrounds as well. I am not racist. And that is fine. But the way I picture it in my mind, because I'm a very visual person, when somebody says they're not racist, I imagine some pebbles that are kind of just strewn about in like a creek. And a babbling creek, which is the racism that exists throughout society, is still flowing. You're there, you're not contributing to it, you're not helping it to flow, but you're not stopping it either. I think of being anti-racist as being very active in that approach, and being like a dam that is stopping that creek from running, and thinking about how that plays out in different ways in our lives. Being here tonight is part of that, because folks are here to get context and get some practical ideas around how to have these conversations. So by you choosing to be here, that is a very active statement and behavior. And that is essentially an anti-racist behavior, to say that you want to have the knowledge and the language to be able to approach these things head on with your children. We can think about that when, if we hear friends or other family members making racist comments, and instead of just saying, oh, well, that's just how grandma is, or that's how aunt so-and-so is, nipping that in the bud. It might be uncomfortable, but that's the active behavior that's required in being anti-racist. So just thinking about the things that we do, actively finding books that highlight stories of people of different backgrounds, making sure that the films and the TV shows our children and our families are watching are diverse as well, and normalizing seeing people of different races and backgrounds in a variety of different fields is really important as well. So we want to think about not just being non-racist in this conversation, we want to actively be anti-racist. And colorblindness does not fit with that. So definitely it's something that means well, but it does not help. So if we move forward a little bit and think about how some of these things play out in the school systems, and there have been a lot of studies around stereotypes of Black children, particularly from, again, an African-American perspective, because they are much better than we are here in Canada at collecting race-based data that paints an important picture. I'll get to some of that importance in a little bit. But if we think about how anti-Black racism plays out in our school systems, stereotypes of Black children include Black children being considered more threatening, being considered more violent or more hostile, being considered less intelligent. We've seen that through some of the statistics that have come out about streaming processes and how Black children are often streamed into kind of the lower streams, the applied courses instead of academic courses. Going back to some of the threatening and violent behavior, we've seen that here in Canada, where I believe it was in Peel region, where a 6-year-old Black girl was handcuffed to a desk, or she was handcuffed behind her back because of some behavioral issues where the police were actually called into the school. And to think of a 6-year-old being so threatening to adults that they needed to handcuff her is very traumatic to think about, let alone to have experienced or to have been that parent of that child. Black boys often face this, where their behaviors are often seen as very threatening or very violent as well. Black girls also are often seen as more adult-like. And this goes to a variety of different things that play out within Black communities as well, but it's a stereotype that plays out for children when we're being viewed by people outside of our race, where Black children are seen as more mature. So Black girls do not require as much support. They are not seen as innocent as their white counterparts. They are thought of to be more guilty. If something happens, if a jar breaks and there's a Black girl and a white girl standing there, statistics are going to show that an adult is usually going to look to the Black girl first and assume that she was the culprit. Black boys also get this as well, where if you think about in the media, I've seen a number of times where Black children as young as 12 years old, Tamir Rice was a 12-year-old boy, I believe, who was shot by police in the US a few years ago. And in different media reports, he was referred to as a man. a 12-year-old child. We've seen children, even in their late teens, who, if they're white, they are considered children, but if they're Black, they're called young men or young women. So Black children's childhood is stripped from them in many different ways. And it's really important that, as a writer, language is very important to me. So we need to think about the language that we use to describe Black children when we're speaking about them. They are not men, they are not women, they are children. And these things, I'm speaking just specifically about children just because of the conversation we're having today, but these are stereotypes that continue into adulthood as well. So it's really important that in trying to really deter ourselves from contributing to this type of anti-Black racism, we ensure that our language and our stereotypes and our biases we're well aware of them so that we do not perpetuate these things when we're looking at children as well. Now, because of a lot of these stereotypes of Black children, we often see that school suspensions and expulsions disproportionately affect Black students. And most of the data, again, I'm repeating myself over and over, is based on American statistics, because American statistics will generally account for race. We have started getting over our allergic reaction in Canada to race-based data and have started collecting that. And what's really great, and something that the DDSB should be very proud of, is that we are one of the first boards to actually have started implementing collecting race-based data among students and educators. I think it's by 2023, all school boards in Ontario need to be collecting this type of race-based data. And DDSB is one of those boards who is kind of, ahead of the curve with that. So there was a student census done by the DDSB back in 2019, and a report was just released to kind of detail what that census found. And one of the important things to highlight for our conversation tonight is that it showed that Black students are faring worse than their counterparts of other races in a variety of ways throughout the DDSB. And Black students, at least for the amount of people who responded, Black students make up 12% of the DDSB based on the responses, but make up a very disproportionate number of suspensions. And there are also very significantly, there's a significant gap between the number of Black graduates who finish high school compared to white and South Asian graduates. So I think that, there's been some stuff in the media and some commentary on that already in the past week or so, but it's really important that we situate ourselves in these conversations to understand that these are things that are playing out right here in our backyards. We can often look to the US and think that so much of these conversations are American based and they're American issues. We have very, very similar issues and consequences for our children here as well. So it's really important that we consider that and look at what is happening right here at home so that we can help our children to have better outcomes as well. Now we're going to just talk about some important terms. Oops, let me not click that. And again, this goes back to the idea of how we educate ourselves as kind of the adults in the situation to be able to have these conversations with our children. So back in the September issue of Today's Parent, I wrote a few articles, was part of a package that spoke exactly to what we're talking about tonight around how to raise anti-racist children and have these types of conversations with teachers, with other family members, with other friends in our circles as well, to ensure that everyone is supporting this idea of being anti-racist. And one of the articles I wrote was a glossary of different terms to know. It's online, so if you didn't get the physical copy, all of these articles are online and they're an amazing resource. But I just want to go through some of these terms that will hopefully be enlightening for you all to think about and maybe just add some context to some things that we've been hearing a lot about in recent months as well. So the idea of enslaved people versus slaves is really important. And I've spoken a lot about that this month in my various Black History Month talks that I've done. And why I wanted to add this was because very often when we speak about slavery, when we speak about people who were part of the transatlantic slave trade, we refer to them as slaves. And I find this to be very dehumanizing because a slave is an identity, but what happened to these people was not an identity choice. It was something that was enacted upon them. The act of slavery was something that was placed upon them. It was not something that they chose to take upon themselves. So that's why when I am speaking to people who were enslaved, I say that exactly. I say enslaved people, enslaved folks of African descent, and I make sure that that is more of a descriptor of the environment they found themselves in and the situation they found themselves in, versus calling them a slave and reducing their identity to simply that. And it's really interesting to think about how even just that shift in language. I remember doing a talk last year at a high school, and I was speaking and explaining to these children different aspects of folks in Black Canadian history, and speaking about an enslaved woman. And I kind of paused and I said, oh, you might hear me say enslaved instead of slave, here's why. And I broke it down for them. And after, I had a couple of the Black students come up to me and say that they had never thought about it, but when they heard me make the difference between saying slave and enslaved person, they realized they felt better. There was a big weight to them when people would just talk about slaves and oh, are you the descendant of slaves and your ancestors are slaves? But to be able to kind of uplift that in a different way by referring to people as enslaved people instead of slaves, it meant something to them. So I think that's something we can think about as well as we move forward. When we think about systemic racism, this is something that's often very difficult for people who, especially who don't deal with systemic racism on a daily basis, to really comprehend. I think we often think about racism as the individual incident of somebody using a racial slur or some act of discrimination. But systemic racism speaks to the fact that racism is embedded in the very institutions that our society is built on. So from education to employment to healthcare to criminal justice, our very societal institutions have been designed with racism embedded within them. That's why we see these things like the statistics around suspensions and expulsions for Black students. That's why we see things like what I've experienced in my life in healthcare, where medical and scientific research dictates that Black people can tolerate pain better. So I have been refused pain medication in the ER because it was deemed that I don't need it that much. I have been assumed to be a drug addict who is in the ER pretending to be in pain for some type of free hit. So systemic racism plays out in all aspects of our society, and that's why we really have to do this work to unpack these things. White privilege is another thing that can be very misconstrued and makes a lot of people uncomfortable. White privilege does not mean that your life is perfect because you are white. That is not what it's saying. There are a whole bunch of other things that can be impacting your life that can make it very difficult and can put you at a different side of the power dynamic. What white privilege speaks to is just that whiteness is not one of those things that is compounding to a negative effect in your life. Thinking about, again, systemic racism and thinking about the fact that society is often built to uphold whiteness. White privilege just means that being white is not something that is limiting you or causing you some systemic discriminatory issue. So that's why we can see in the US and here too, but I'm thinking of examples in the US of Black men like Philando Castile, who was a registered gun owner, was pulled over with his partner and their child in the back seat a few years ago, pulled over for a busted taillight, and it ended with him being shot and killed by police in the car. Then we can look at Dylan Roof, who is a young white man, not from any type of rich means at all, but he shot and killed 9 church parishioners in Charleston. And when he was apprehended alive, he was hungry. So the police stopped at Burger King for him to get something to eat before they took him to jail. So we can see these things playing out. So white privilege does not mean that your life is perfect because you're white. It just means that whiteness, you are supported through your whiteness in society because society upholds whiteness. White fragility is something that has been coined by the scholar, who's a white woman named Robin DiAngelo. And she stated that white fragility is when some white people, even those who identify as progressive or anti-racist, immediately react with defensive indignation when confronted with their own racist behavior. So this is just the idea, and I don't know if folks have maybe experienced this themselves. I have experienced it where I've maybe brought a conversation up with somebody where I've let them know that something they said or did was a bit offensive, and maybe they didn't mean it, but I just wanted to educate them in that moment. And immediately I get one of two responses. Either it's very, very much an indignation or an anger that, well, I didn't mean that. I didn't mean to offend you, and that's not what I mean. And you know me, and maybe you're being sensitive. It didn't come out that way. That is not a good way to respond. And additionally, I've also had it where people have actually started crying and have felt so bad about the offense that they have been so emotional that they've cried. And in both of those situations, what ends up happening is that me, as the person who has felt this harm, I now have to put my feelings aside to cater to the feelings of the person who is either very defensive or very emotional. So there's a whole other conversation that I often do about microaggressions and dealing with them on different sides of the coin. But just thinking about the ways that we look at our response to being called out or being called in these ways. A lot of the times we know people maybe are just coming at things from just a level of just pure ignorance, of just not knowing any better, and not necessarily coming at it from a very negative and harmful aspect. But it's important that we can have those conversations in a fruitful way to move forward. Decolonization is a very big thing as well. And in a social justice sense, decolonizing starts with questioning everything you've been taught about privilege and power dynamics in our society. So why do we learn the history that we do? Who's hailed as the hero and who's left out of the story? What's considered the norm in our society and why? Just asking ourselves these questions and thinking about where some of these norms and these biases come from, and figuring out, do these actually help society, or what's happening when we are harming people through these things? What's happening when we are ignoring people through these things? That's where the work of decolonization comes into play, where we're seeing things like schools being renamed and different aspects of incorporating like land acknowledgements. We're doing different things to decolonize our spaces, and that is very, very important work to do as well. Now, just going along with that, thinking about, oops, I just left my slide there. Here we go. Now, just thinking about moving beyond the idea of diversity and thinking about decolonization in this way. You may have been familiar, you may have seen some graphic that looks like this, usually with the first two images at play, where we've got equality being shown. So even before we get to equality, we can see in these images that we've got diversity because we're seeing different folks. We've got a blue, a red, and a yellow person. They're different colors, they're different sizes. So we've got diversity and we've got inclusion because they're all together. What the first box is showing us is equality. So there's a barrier to this parade that they're trying to watch, and equality dictates that we give everybody the same thing so that they can have the best outcome. Clearly, equality is not the best fit for this, because we still have somebody who, even though they've been given the same thing, they cannot see, so they cannot succeed in this moment. Equity is a better step where we give people what it is that they need to be successful. So we see here, depending on the size of the person, they've given the number of boxes they need to be able to see over this fence, and now everybody is enjoying themselves. So equity is something that we want to aspire to over just equality. We can take that a few steps further. We can look at now justice. And in thinking about justice, we can look at what is the barrier that's in our way in the first place that is requiring us to need these boxes to see what's happening. And in the case, it's the fence. So justice looks like a breaking down and rebuilding of situations. So we see here very clearly in the graphic, they have broken down the fence. And that is part of justice. That's a very simple way of looking at it in this graphic image here. But when we think about justice, we think about the things that we're doing to look at not just the ways that we can help people move around oppression, but the work that we can do to actually get rid of those oppressions in and of themselves. And what goes along with that is not just the act of tearing down the fence, but maybe the person who built the fence is going to put an apology out for building the fence. Maybe the person who built the fence is going to take accountability in some way for building the fence and creating this obstacle for folks. So with justice, it requires accountability before we can get to the next step, which is liberation. And liberation is now the fence is removed. There is no oppression. There is no obstacle in the way. We've got the diversity and the inclusion, and everybody is able to enjoy themselves in that moment. So we can think about going from equality to equity, but now moving from equity to these moments of accountability, these moments of breaking down and rebuilding, so that we do not merely adapt to oppression, but we figure out what it is that we can do to get rid of the oppression in and of itself. So that's what's really important here. And again, remembering that the accountability piece is critical. You cannot build new connections. You cannot build anything based on trust or move forward without that honorable accountability to people. So I think that that's something that we need to think about as well as we move forward in these types of conversations too. And then something that I wanted to bring up here is, as it says here in the middle of this slide, the insidiousness of white supremacy. So when we think about white supremacy, again, that's the idea of, you might hear white supremacy and think of, people in hoods burning crosses on lawns. That's not the only way that it presents itself, but the idea of white supremacy is, and this is another definition that's in my article as well for today's parent, but it's just the idea of the way society has been built to uphold whiteness. Basically, that's what it is. And the insidiousness of this is that this is not something that's just upheld by white people. So I really wanted to make sure that I put this in here in thinking about maybe other non-Black folks of color, or even other Black folks who maybe have internalized some of these things, and just touching on a few key things to think about with this as well. So the first aspect to introduce you to, if you're not familiar, is called colorism. And a lot of cultures of folks of color have dealt with this, where colorism dictates that people who have lighter color skin are often treated better, are more successful. The closer that they are to whiteness, the better they are treated. And the further you are from that, the worse you're treated. So we can think about in India, the caste systems are something that have been very well documented. We can think about how Black folks have been treated, but even within our own cultures, colorism is something that plays out, and that all feeds back into white supremacy, because again, the person with the lighter skin who is closer to looking white is often treated better, because this is the society that we live in. Next is the idea of the model minority myth. And this is something that, as I was reading over the past few years and doing different research and writing on things, it's something that is very common in Asian backgrounds. But it's something that is often used to pit different races against each other. So there's a lot of documentation and research done on how Asian people are pitted against Black people, and this idea of the model minority. Like, if you're going to be a minority, at least be a good minority. And certain people are held up as this idea of the good minority that everybody else should aspire to be like. And not only is this harmful because it creates additional obstacles and barriers for the minority group who's on the other side of that dime. So it could be the Black person or Black student who's being compared to a student of a different race and saying, why don't you be more like them? And thinking that because of their race, they're more successful if they're of an Asian background, for instance. Or we're not really thinking about white folks in this instance, because these are all about folks of color. But it also is harmful to the people who are considered the models, because this also places them in a box and places different biases and different assumptions on them that can be very harmful. So there are some people who aspire to this and think that the way to get to survival is to be considered the model minority. And then they will also feed into anti-Black racism and these other things to ensure that they stay kind of at the top of the top of the pile, I guess, in terms of being able to move through life in a bit of an easier way, because they're considered a model minority. So this is something we've got to be very careful of, and how we relate to each other as people of color as well, and ensure that we are not creating more damage within ourselves as we kind of try to move through these things as well. Assimilation is a very big thing, where the idea of wanting to separate yourself from your culture as much as possible to be able to assimilate and blend in more easily with the overall majority. And this happens in a lot of different ways. This happens like not using your mother tongue if you speak a different language and only speaking English. This looks like people having their names changed to sound more Canadian or more white. This looks like a variety of different things that people do to assimilate to try to move through life without these differences being highlighted. And that's a choice that everybody's got to make for themselves. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations with my parents and people of older generations in my family around the things that they had to do in immigrating to Canada to assimilate, just to be able to get a job, just to be able to get an apartment. And I look at it kind of with the privilege of being a millennial now and, you know, being radicalized through social media. And I've got all these different, this different language and these different experiences at my fingertips, and thinking, well, that way was so wrong. You shouldn't have done that. You should have just been yourself. So it's a very complicated conversation. But I think that what we want to do is make sure that our culture and our society is enriched enough that people don't feel that they have to hide what it is that makes them unique. They don't have to hide their culture. This gets into a much bigger conversation, but the ways that we can do that within our small spaces, within our social circles, within our schools is really important to ensure that people don't feel like they have to do this to survive. And the last word is survival. And I've done it kind of upside down to show the fact that it's really kind of a topsy-turvy thing. When we think about being people of color, or being Black folks specifically, surviving in an or a very racist society, survival is not true survival. Survival should be a foundation that sets you up to be able to thrive. But much of these aspects of survival just keep us going enough to get to the next day, or just do enough to hopefully keep us out of trouble. So I really want people to think about, what does survival actually mean? What does survival mean for you as a Black person or another person of color living in a society that upholds whiteness? And are you truly surviving? Or is there work that you need to do to maybe eradicate some of these things so that you can actually build the foundation to thrive as well? So it's really just important to think about the fact that anti-Black racism is something that is not just enacted and upheld by white people. It's done by folks of color. It's done within Black communities as well. So this is why it's really important. And I'm glad to know that we have a wide range of folks who are here tonight. So hopefully we can all kind of take something away from this and see how it may apply, if it does at all, to our own lives and how we move through the world. Now we're going to get into talking a little bit about media and using the media. I think in Director Marsh's intro speaking, she spoke about media a bit there, which is really important because our children are living through media right now. They are in a very different space in terms of how they're getting their information. And it's really important to think about how we can utilize that as well. Going to the next slide, there we go. So thinking about media, something that's really important to note is that, the death of George Floyd really brought about a lot of discussion. It brought about kind of this new revolutionary moment that we're in terms of talking about race and racism. I predict that these conversations are about to get a lot more amplified again, because next month, the trial of Derek Chauvin, who is one of the police officers on site, physically actually the man who had his knee on George Floyd's neck, his trial begins in March. So I've already seen conversation on social media where people are saying, the George Floyd trial is starting next month. Everybody, we got to make sure, we get justice. And there's two things to think about. For one, it's not George Floyd's trial. George Floyd is not on trial. George Floyd is dead. Derek Chauvin is on trial. And this is another way that white privilege kind of plays out, because we don't even name the perpetrator. The Black man is the man at the center of this as the victim, but now we are equating this to being his trial. So we really need to make sure that we name things appropriately. But what's going to come with that is more information throughout the news, bringing back the stories of the case and what happened. And our children are going to be very aware of this. So I think it's really important to think about what our children are seeing and what's appropriate. And I think that for younger kids, I've had this conversation with my girls where they were inquiring about why people are protesting and who is this man that they keep seeing pictures of on my phone. For younger children, we don't need to get into the nitty-gritty necessarily of the violence and the actual physical trauma, but we can explain the context around it, that because of the color of his skin, he was seen as a bad person, and these police thought he was a bad man, and they hurt him, or if you want to say they killed him, depending on how your child can handle that. But I think what's important to focus on is not necessarily the act of what happened with children, because that can create more trauma than we might be ready to deal with, but how did we even get in this scenario, and having a conversation around that. I think there are pros and cons to social media as well, which are really important to think about. Some pros are that it's great to have at your fingertips new resources and new connections to learn about things around the world. I have learned so much through social media and just by being connected to people who share experiences like me, but also don't and have different experiences. It's really important, though, to be on top of your children's social media because there's a lot of misinformation, as we have seen, especially through the Trump presidency, with a lot of different confusion and the way that it's been a bit weaponized to create that confusion. So I think obviously it's a big topic, and I'm sure a lot of parents are very aware of staying on top of social media, but I think that it's a good tool for children to have because of how it opens them up to a world beyond their physical space. And there are a lot of amazing resources. I would say that if your child is using social media to learn, I know kids are doing amazing things with TikTok to provide great information, is to consider that just one source. Always encourage your children to go back, and if somebody has said something, defining something around race or talking about something racist or talking about some other type of oppression, encourage them to go find other things to see if there's other information that supports that or not. We have to make sure that kids don't just look at social media in a bubble and think that that is the truth and that's it. It's one resource. So we want to encourage them to utilize other resources. And also the power of saying, I don't know. I think a lot of times adults, we don't want to say, I don't know. And our kids sometimes don't expect us to say, I don't know. But it's really important that we do that so that we can learn together and so that children can understand that these are lifelong concepts. These are things that maybe some of the adults in their lives haven't even experienced or haven't had the language to describe. So if your child approaches you with something and you don't know, say you don't know. The thing is to move from that and say, here's how we're going to figure it out. So it's really important to be able to do that as well and show them that you can learn together and that no one person has all the answers, so that they are encouraged to continue to learn on their own as well. And again, like I said before, language really matters in how we have these conversations with our children. So I just want to highlight a few quick things here. One is that Blackness isn't a burden. And this is something that I've had to say in a lot of different audiences, because again, it can be very easy to say, it's so hard being a Black woman, or somebody who's not Black might say, wow, it's a really tough life being Black. And that could be a very well-meaning statement, but I really want people to understand that even as we're having conversations with children, Blackness is not the burden. The burden is living in an anti-Black society. So we need to contextualize what the actual burden is. Because going back to what I mentioned about the talk that Black parents have to have with our children, it can feel very heavy. I remember it feeling very heavy to me, like, oh my gosh, now like I can't just move through the world like my friends do. I've got to think about all these other things, and it feels like such a burden. We have to remember to encourage children to know that that's not their burden to carry. It's the burden of the society that we're in. And also for non-Black children, when we're thinking about things and having conversations and doing presentations for Black History Month or doing other things where we're talking about Blackness in the news and in the media, the negative aspect is not the fact of somebody being Black. The negative aspect is the context of the society that does not see the beauty and the resilience and the complexities of Blackness. So Blackness is not the burden, it's the living in an anti-Black society that is. Next is to share positive attributes. And this is something that I made sure to do in my presentations, especially to the schools that I did this month with Black History Month, where I wanted to make sure that I highlighted for kids struggles and challenges and historical things that have happened to create these dynamics of racism, but not to reduce a Black story to that. So even in thinking about introducing children to the ideas of slavery, ensuring that children know prior to slavery, Black folks were doing amazing things, creating amazing things, living incredible lives. There was a whole existence prior to this thing. We did not begin with slavery. And even through thinking about moving through more modern times, where we can focus on struggles, we can focus on the challenges, because those are very real things that our children need to be aware of. But we also need to arm them with the fact that there's a lot of beauty and a lot of positivity to share about Black experiences, about Black history, and in the things that we're seeing even today. So ensuring that we balance those challenges with the positive attributes is really important to help children to start to see those positive things in themselves or in their friends and in the people that they're around who may be Black as well. And again, we want to reject avoidance. So your child approaches you about something that happened, or a conversation, or something they saw on the news or on social media, and you say, I don't know, and you shut the conversation down, or you say, well, that's not appropriate, we don't want to talk about that. Avoidance is not an answer. And I'm sure a lot of people know that, if your child asks you the simplest question and they say, well, why is this? And it's like, well, just because. Well, why? Because. Well, why? Because. I'm sure we've been through that a million times with the simplest thing. That continuing loop happens with our children when they are bringing these serious issues. They know that these things are serious. They know that these things are meaningful. And we add more confusion when we avoid it, because now not only do they not have the answer to their question, but now they have an additional question of, why could I not even ask that question? So even if your answer is, I don't know, or I've never thought about that, or I've never experienced that, that's just the first step. The next step is to ensure that you address the question in whatever appropriate way it is for your child, but give them something. They're looking to you to have the answers, but if you don't have the answer, you find the answer together. And just to wrap up, the time is going really fast, but we're almost at the end here and getting ready for the Q&A, is thinking about, where do we go from here? So we want to ensure that we model anti-racist practices. So this is in the things that we say, this is in the things that we do. This is where we challenge people who we have maybe allowed to make comments because we know that's how they are and they don't mean it. That's understanding that intent and impact are two different things. So your intention may not have been to be offensive, but the impact was that you were offensive. So just knowing that those two things are very different. These are in the conversations that we have. These are in the things that we sit and watch with our children. These are all the things that we do to build the positive space of showing true diversity and showing Black folks and other people of color in tons of different lights, but it's also in the ways that we move from being those pebbles in the stream to being that dam that's blocking it in those moments, and letting our children see those things as well, so that they understand what is appropriate and who are the people that we're trying to be. They need to see these things in action as well. And diversifying your media is really important. So thinking about the books that your children have, thinking about the TV shows and the movies that they watch, thinking about, my kids are obsessed with YouTube, and thinking about diversifying the types of YouTube celebrities that they're hooked on. Ensuring that they, in the mix of the ones that all their other friends are looking at, making sure that we find some that are people who look like them as well, so that they can identify with some of these other little young Black girls or Black boys who are doing things and look like them and look like the people in their family too. So diversifying media is important for Black children, but it's also important for non-Black children as well, to be able to see Black people in different stories, whether the story is explicitly about being Black or not. It's really important that we just get to see Black people being normal. Black people just in the cartoons, Black people just in the movies, Black people just writing the stories or in the stories that we are reading to our children. So diversifying doesn't always have to just be, let's make sure we get a bunch of books about Black history. Mix it up. Just make sure, if they're watching different shows and things, make sure that there's people of different colors in there as well, just so that they can see people being normal who are of different backgrounds. Pushing for curriculum changes is really important. I've seen through the past few years a lot of great work being done across different boards to ensure that Black History Month is something that is done in a much better light and much more focused on Black Canadian history as well. But I think what's more important than that is to ensure that we embed Black history and Black experiences through curriculum around the year, and not just limiting that to February. These are things that should be in our curriculums all year round, and ensuring that all students have the opportunities to learn about Black folks who've come before them, Black folks who are doing incredible and amazing things now. And that goes to looking at staffing and hopefully seeing some diversification of our educators as well, and thinking about what that means for children to have that type of representation as well in their school systems. So pushing for curriculum changes is really important. I do a lot of speaking at schools, and one thing that I'm hoping for that I mentioned in an event that I did earlier this week was that I love it. My 6-year-old has been kind of my mini agent who has brought me into every class, JK, SK, and now grade 1 that I did yesterday, to speak to her class or to her grade about Black history. And I love doing it. I just want to get to the point where I can be the add-on to what is already happening in school and not be the only aspect of Black History Month that is covered for students. So that's where I'm trying to push things as well in the work that I do. Unlearning and learning together is really important. Unlearning, those are some of the things that we've already started to do, and thinking about some of the definitions and rethinking some things that have maybe challenged folks before, and thinking about how it relates to their own lives when we think about privilege, or when we think about decolonization, or when we think about language and all those different aspects. So unlearning those things, breaking those things down, and really interrogating within yourself where those things have come from, and are they meaningful or are they harmful, and then relearning a better way together. And we can do that within ourselves, but we need to do that with our children as well. And they need to see us doing that work in ourselves, so that, again, they understand that this is a lifelong process, and to know that their parent is also learning and trying to do better will encourage them to do the same as well. And all of these things will contribute to positive change. Now, if we think about allyship, this is something that is very important, and we do a lot of talks about this, and a lot of people want to know how they can be a better ally, or how they can raise their children to be great allies. So there's a little bit of an equation that I have when I think about healthy allyship. One is, you want to make sure you learn. This is what we're doing here tonight. We are here to learn. So continue that self-education as well. There's amazing resources. I believe there's going to be some great resources offered as door prizes for folks who are here tonight, different books and things of that nature. There's a wealth of information out there to help you learn more, and to help you unlearn those things that have been harmful that you've carried throughout life as well. You also want to be able to serve. And this means serving people in the way that they need to be served. So I think sometimes what happens with people who consider themselves allies is they want to jump in and do what they think needs to be done. And that's not really the right way to go about it, because we've got to honor the autonomy of and the self-determination of the people who we are trying to be allies to. So you want to serve in the way and the capacity that that person needs you to serve in. Do not serve in the way you would want to have somebody help you, because this is not your situation. And don't serve in a way that you think will be better for that person because you know better. We have to honor people's lived experiences and honor their lives, and ensure that when we are serving people as allies, we're asking them first, what do you need me to do? How can I help? Is there anything I can do to help? And then we take the lead from there. Seeding space is really important as well as an ally, and that is to make room for other people, make room for other voices, make room for other opinions. I have my different areas of oppression in my life as being a Black woman, but I also have areas of privilege as well. For one, I'm a cisgender woman. So I try to use my platforms to step back and make space for trans women to be able to speak on their experiences as well, because I see where my privilege lies in that. And that's something that I'm doing a lot of learning and unlearning and serving as well. As I'm talking to you about anti-Black racism, there's ways that this plays out in other aspects of life too. So finding ways to step back and allow other people to have platforms and allow other people to be able to make space for themselves is really important as an ally. And we want to add all those things together, but we want to remove ego. So ego means being an ally shouldn't be about you feeling good about yourself. It shouldn't be about you. Being an ally is about supporting the people who have allowed you to support them. So ego is not going to get you anywhere. Being performative is not going to get you anywhere. It has to be meaningful. And the meaningfulness is really driven by honoring what it is that the people who are being allies to need. And to kind of sum that up in a really great quote from the author Arundhati Roy, she wrote, "There's really no such thing as the voiceless. There are only the deliberately silenced and the preferably unheard." And I think that that's a great thing to take away as we think about allyship, but as we think about the broader conversation as well. We don't want to think about people as being voiceless. We just want to think about the aspects of ways that people have been deliberately silenced, or the ways that people have been rendered preferably unheard, and doing the work that we can do to rectify those things for people so that they have the ample opportunity to use their own voices as well. And I've been doing a lot of talking, and I think we're down to time and about to get into some Q&A, but I just wanted to thank everybody. And I've got my contact information there for folks who may want to get in touch with me or follow me for more information. I also mix it in with lots of madness with my children and maybe things that Beyonce and Rihanna are up to. So I'm a mixed bag. I contain multitudes, like Walt Whitman said, but feel free to connect with me and we can continue these conversations as well. And I think we're going to move into Q&A. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys can see my face, and we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Bea, for sharing such timely and necessary information this evening. Also, thank you to all the participants for sharing your questions with us this evening, as well as those of you who were doing the upvoting process. Please know that although not all questions this evening will be answered live, all questions will be captured, answered, and will be shared with you at a later date through email. So Bea will start off with reading the first question, and I'll post this to your chat box as well so you can have reference to it. The first question is, can you provide strategies for children and youth to address possible responses to conversations about anti-Black racism, such as countering, withholding, or trivializing?
Thanks, I see that in the chat there. So I think that what we need to consider is, I find that with children, at least what I have experienced in some of the work that I've done, and even the things with my own children, is really the trivializing aspect. And I think that what we can do to combat that is, it goes back to, where are our children getting this context to minimize the humanity of other people, to trivialize what their experiences are in the first place. And I think that what we need to do is, asking our children questions is really important. That's a strategy that I use with my children, where they're having conversations about things, or they make a comment about somebody who looks different from them, or something that is very different. And maybe I see them trying to, starting to assign some negative attribute to it, is I ask them, even at their young age, even at 6 and 3, and I ask, why do you think that? Where did you get that thought from? Or why do you think that person is that way because you have said this thing? And it makes them reflect back on where they've gotten that. And that provides really important context for the adult in the situation to know where some of these messages are coming from. But it also encourages children to think about that. And then you can have broader conversations from there to kind of steer them away from that, or to provide them better resources that help them to kind of rectify the situation. So I think one of the best strategies is, in encountering these things, is asking questions of your children as well. Children will come to us with a lot of questions, but we want to ask them questions to find out, how are they situating themselves in this, and where are they getting this information? And then that's kind of a better starting off point to be able to know how we approach going from there.
Thank you. On to the next question. Being in a community where even just recently has been accused and proved to be systemically racist, how can we discuss the role of police to Black children without giving them the rose-colored glasses view of the police that they are taught in school, without leaving them socially unaware?
That's a very complex one. And I think that what we can do around that is, there's a lot of work being done around defunding police and people who are doing prison abolition and all of those kind of really, really big concepts. But I think what we can do and explain to Black children is that, like, even a lot of Black children still look up to police. A lot of Black children think about police as being the good guys. And I think we just need to contextualize for Black children that there can be good individual people, but sometimes we have to be careful, because the kind of bigger aspect of kind of the community that they belong to, sometimes there's some bad apples in there too. And this is going to depend on how young your child is and kind of what their level of understanding is. But I think it's important to not scare them, so that they do not fear every police officer or somebody who they assume to be a police officer when they're in their vicinity. But I think it's about explaining to them that while there can be very good people, there are also bad people. It's just like anywhere else in society. There are good people and there are bad people. And we just have to use those contexts to help them to understand that they don't need to be afraid and they don't need to be traumatized unnecessarily, but they need to have that awareness that not everybody is good. And if they have more questions about that, then there are lots of great resources. Today's Parent has great resources on how to talk about police with Black children as well, with different ages. So I urge people to go look into some of that as well. But I think just providing that balance, if you can, so that they're not afraid, but they also understand that there's some complexity to that identity as well.
Thank you. On to the next question. For families who live in Northern Durham, where we don't have a lot of diversity in our schools and communities, do you have any recommendations for approaching the conversation about race?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's, if you don't necessarily see it around you every day, and again, even in COVID life, we are not around a lot of people as we usually are anyway. But I think those are where we can look at the different TV shows that we're watching, or look at the different aspects of media that our children are taking in, and maybe start conversations from there. If you see something, maybe there's a show on, and depending on how old the child is, I'm not sure, but if there is, a Black person who, maybe you're watching a cop show and there's a Black person who's being apprehended, maybe there's an opportunity to have a conversation of, well, why do you think that, they went after that guy? Why do you think that they're trying to get that guy? And have a conversation about that, and then utilize media to show good and bad examples of what diversity looks like, and to show good and bad examples of how we can either look at the negatives of anti-Black racism, or the ways that we can kind of work against it. And I think also some of these things don't have to be so planned and formal. It can be about, again, like I mentioned, utilizing the diversity of books that children are reading, diversity of the shows that they're watching. So it just becomes normalized for them to see different types of people doing different things. So these conversations don't always have to be a very formal thing either. It can kind of be just kind of feeding your children different things, so that it starts to normalize a different worldview. So when they are out in the world, certain things are just normal for them to already see, because this has been reflected in the media and the things that they're interested in and that they're taking in as well.
Thank you. On to the next question. I was really aware of my white privilege in the last couple of years. How can I actively make my child aware of her privilege now that she is totally unaware of?
I think some of this is just having, and this is going against what I just said about not having, everything doesn't need to be a formalized conversation. But I think, especially as different things are happening in the news, or if your child comes to you with a story about something that happened where somebody was getting picked on because they look different, utilizing some of those ways as kind of the vehicle into to being able to explain to your child about their white privilege that they have. There's lots of things that happen in a child's day that we can use to have these conversations with. At least maybe that's just what I find with my own children, and having conversations with them, and thinking about the friends that they have. But I think that it's about identifying those things. Or even if, going back to the media thing, like I mentioned, if your child is watching, if all of the YouTube folks, or all the TikTok folks, or all the shows they watch only have white people, maybe it's about asking your child, oh, don't you notice that like every time you're on, there's only white people? Or is it easy for you to find people of other races? And maybe that's a way into the conversation, to talk about the ways that white privilege has normalized whiteness, to the point that now your child's media is maybe not as diverse, or the things they're taking in, or the things that they feel are good are not as diverse. So sometimes it's about even asking them those questions, or interrogating the things that they're already interested in, to bring out those bigger conversations too.
Thank you. And now we'll go on to the last question for this evening for you, B. I would love any advice that you can give around how to support the families of the children that I work with to approach these conversations, as well as encouraging coworkers who are not ready to actively seek guidance themselves, to seek that guidance, do some reflection, and make sure they're having these conversations as well.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind for the kind of second part of that question, in regards to fellow colleagues, is like, we're seeing the statistics coming out. We're seeing the data coming out about the ways that Black children are literally faring worse than other children. And I think it's just, this may be very cut and dry, but I would think, why are you in this field? Why are you doing this work if it is not to better the outcomes for all children? So I would probably, if it was me, I would probably be challenging my own colleagues to say, we see the information. And I think part of why that has been able to be kind of just, shoved under a rug is because we didn't have the data. We only had anecdotal evidence of things that people would say, oh, that child is too sensitive, or oh, that parent was too sensitive, and that's not what the teacher meant, or that's not what the administrator meant. We're seeing the data now, and data does not lie, and we cannot ignore that anymore. So I think with colleagues, I would just, I don't have a lot of patience for that. So I would say, why are you here if not to improve the lives and the outcomes of all students? And making this kind of just like a normalized part of conversation. I know that across the board, educators are reading different books, and there are different resources to focus on anti-Black racism, and just having general conversations about those things as well. That person will eventually, either through the fact of feeling challenged or through the fact of being left out of the conversation, that might inspire them to start to kind of investigate these things. I feel that there's no middle ground when it comes to issues around race and racism specifically. There's no meeting in the middle. There's only racist, or upholding oppression, or not upholding oppression. There's nowhere to meet in the middle. So people have to choose their sides, and that can be very clear. But for supporting families as well, I think that would be going back to some of the things that I mentioned about allyship, and specifically if we're thinking about how to support Black families, is utilizing Black History Month maybe as a way to kick this off, or if we do another student census, or if there are different activities in the class to highlight things around culture or anything like that, and asking families kind of what they think would be helpful or interesting, or what their child might enjoy in the space to share about who they are and to have these conversations. Because I think that the more we do this and the more we normalize these things for all children, it's really important for everybody to see. It's important for the confidence of the child, the Black child or the other child of color, but it's important for non-Black children as well to be able to normalize these types of conversations and see these different things happening in their space. And I think that working with families as well, it doesn't have to be a prescriptive thing. This can be a thing that is done in conjunction with families to see what would be helpful and what would be meaningful too.
Thank you so much, Bea. And thank you to all of our guests for your participation in tonight's chat box, as well as the upvoting. A reminder that we will be posting all the answers that were posted tonight that were not answered live. At this time, I would like to invite Shelley Craig to share the next portion of tonight's presentation.
Thank you, Melissa. It's my pleasure on behalf of the DDSB Parent Engagement Committee to thank you, Bea, for leading us as we learn how to talk with our children about anti-Black racism. As we move forward to support real and sustainable change, you've helped us understand the difference between non-racist and anti-racist. And you've coached us to be an active anti-racist, being that dam to stop the flow of the stream of racism. You've given us knowledge and language to approach conversations. Thank you, Bea, for sharing your lived experience, your research, and the love you have for teaching and leading. I now welcome Superintendent Erin Elmharris back to the presentation.
There we go. Thank you so much. Yes, Bea, I'll reiterate that huge thank you for this evening. I know that it was beneficial for all who watched, so we hope to continue to engage with you. We know that we have 86 questions that have come in, and some of them we'll be able to consolidate to provide answers for parents and community members, and I'm sure we'll be engaging in ongoing conversation as we move forward. So thank you, and we hope you'll be able to stick around for the remainder of the evening.
For sure, I'm here. You guys have me for the evening.
Excellent, thank you. So at this time, we are going to ask and call upon Dr. Sandra Newton and Karen Purcell, who are members of the Inclusive Student Services team with the Durham District School Board. And they're also members of the Anti-Black Racism Toolkit writing team. And they're going to be here with us this evening. I'll share my screen shortly to share a resource that they've created that will also be shared with families. So I'm going to pass it over to Sandra and Karen now.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Elmhurst. And good evening, everyone. We hope that you enjoyed our speaker, B. Kwame's presentation as much as we did. It was absolutely informative and so interesting. Thank you, B. It is our pleasure to be able to follow her message with a special one of our own, presented on behalf of social work and psychological services teams at DDSB. Thank you, DDSB Parent Involvement Committee, for this opportunity to share with your guests tonight.
And good evening. My name is Karen Purcell, as mentioned, and I am a social worker in the Ajax area within the J. Clark Richardson family of schools. I'm also a parent to a very vibrant 6-year-old boy.
And I'm Sandra Newton, as mentioned, a member of the psychological services team. I support elementary schools in the Oshawa area, including Gail Roberts, O'Neill, Eastdale, and Maxwell Heights families of schools.
We represent the social work and psychological services collective behind this just released document, addressing anti-Black racism and its impact, a well-being toolkit for families. We hope that many of you have or will soon receive a link to this resource through your school newsletter, the DDSB website, or through social media links. At this point, I would like to invite you to refer to the Q&A box where you'll find the link to access the toolkit. In the next few moments, we hope to share the story behind the toolkit and some ways that we hope it will support well-being.
Thank you, Karen. Maybe have the next, actually the slide's just perfect. Over the last year, we've all had to deal, I should say, with the challenges of COVID-19 and the many changes it has produced in our lives. For the Black community, this time has also meant continuing to navigate the detrimental effects of anti-Black racism, and you heard about many of them during our presentation tonight. As we are all learning to cope with the pandemic, May of last year brought the much publicized death of George Floyd, followed by losses of many other Black lives to our screens. The visual impact could not be denied and served as a powerful reminder of the existence of anti-Black racism and the disregard for Black lives. We know from a growing body of research that anti-Black racism's impact involves the harm of racial trauma. This arises from ongoing exposure to anti-Black racism, and symptoms are very similar to those one might expect in a situation of post-traumatic stress. We also know that left unaddressed, ongoing exposure can contribute to intergenerational trauma in families.
Parents have come forward to express their fears and concerns for their children, not only in the community, but in the school system as well. Some have asked for resources to help younger and older children alike understand why such things were happening to people who look just like them. When school resumed, returning students asked their teachers what their school's response to current events would be. And teachers have also come forward asking for resources to support children and youth. In an effort to respond to parent and school communities' needs, members of the Social Work and Psychological Services Department, a diverse team of individuals, came together to develop a resource to support DDSB's Black students and families in a tangible way. Next slide. The Wellbeing Toolkit shown here was designed to provide an abundance of information and resources that would affirm and validate lived experiences, speak to the negative impact that anti-Black racism can have, and support building of positive racial identities, especially for children and youth.
While the toolkit was developed to address the needs of Black families, as mentioned, we also believe that all communities can benefit from this resource. For non-Black and non-racialized community members, it can serve to increase awareness of anti-Black racism and its impact, and provide greater insight into how to become allies in hopes that others too will speak up and speak out against anti-Black racism.
We offer you now a quick walkthrough of some of the content and sections. Black history. This section features a variety of books, podcasts, articles, and videos showcasing the richness of Black history and heritage, acknowledging and celebrating the many contributions made by Black people in different areas of society. Next. building positive self-image and self-esteem. Similarly, this section features a combination of resources that foster and affirm positive racial identity, self-image, and self-esteem. Celebrating Blackness and its beauty from skin tone, hair texture, and facial features or physical features. It is important for children to hear and see themselves reflected in a positive manner.
Self-care tips and tools for caregivers. As you might imagine, with a captive audience of families and others who care about families present, we want to reinforce the importance of caring for oneself in the caregiving role. And this section does talk about wellness practices that can support well-being in daily life. We do hope that people will find that very helpful. And the next slide, please. This is possibly the largest section we have, in addition to many books and so on. This deals with clinical and community resources that individuals can find for themselves, for their children, for their families. And in addition to clinical and therapeutic and mental health resources and providers that serve racialized communities, we also have links to important topics such as housing and food security, educational resources, and much more. And these, again, are providers located in our immediate region. We hope you'll find it really helpful.
In summary, we trust that the resources in this toolkit will support ongoing, meaningful conversation about race and racism at home and at school. Members of social work and psychological services team will be presenting this toolkit to schools to bring awareness to anti-Black racism and its impact on Black students' well-being. In addition, we plan to engage in further dialogue with school staff in an effort to work together to dismantle anti-Black racism in the school system. It is a living document that we hope to update and refresh periodically. We will be seeking the community's input, your input, ongoing to make this resource as useful and supportive as possible.
Please feel free to reach out to us as social work and psychological services teams about this toolkit or any of our supports for students and families. We may be contacted through our schools and the Inclusive Student Services page on the DDSB website. During this session, you are also welcome to post queries about our toolkit, your toolkit, to the Q&A box, and we will work on addressing those in follow-up, as has been mentioned. But please accept our thanks for your time and attention tonight, and I'll return to the next speaker, please.
Hi, and good evening, everybody. Wow, what a night. B, that was beautiful. You spoke so well. You were brave, you were bold, fantastic. Thanks to Sandra and Karen. It's so important to know that we have information that will continue the good work that we feel proud to have been part of this evening. Just some quick housekeeping matters. I'd like to introduce my two co-chairs, both of whom have already spoken, Melissa Shields and Shelley Craig, who worked tirelessly with me and all of our team to put the evening together. They were incredibly humble to do their work and not introduce themselves. I'd like to do that for them and to thank them for their work. When the evening finishes, you will get a survey that will be sent immediately to your inbox. Please, if you're interested in winning some of the virtual prizes, and we have some amazing books for you, and it was so pleasing to see how some of you were answering each other's questions in the Q&A about resources. We want you to win these prizes. Complete the survey, give us your information, and you need to tell us if you would like to be included in the draw. And if yes, once you've filled in the survey and we have the ability to know if you're interested in winning a prize or not, we'll get them right to you. We also have something very interesting to share with you, and that is the next event of the Parent Engagement Committee, the Parents as Partners Symposium, coming up virtually on Wednesday, May the 26th. You can see it on the slide. There'll be more information about it. But if you enjoyed this evening, please make every effort to join us on Wednesday, May the 26th. it should be as good, if not much, much better. Finally, a reminder that all questions will be answered via email, and really a thank you to everybody. It's hard to believe that at the height of the evening, we had almost 700 people joining us tonight. I think it's incredible that so many people registered, and that says to me that you want to see this again. So it will be posted. We are recording the evening, and if you couldn't make it tonight, feel free to look at it again or to encourage your friends and family to take a look at the presentation. Finally, a thank you again to B. I'd like to thank our director, Norah Marsh, and our acting superintendent, Elmhurst, for encouraging this evening, for allowing it to happen, to Val Estridge, one of the chairs of the Parent Involvement Committee, and to all of the members of the Parent Involvement Committee, a huge thank you. Then you haven't seen them, but there's a whole team of volunteers working tirelessly behind the scenes to make this evening happen. I would like to thank each one of them personally, and a special thank you to our technical team of John and Andrew, who made sure that the evening ran as smoothly as it did. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to be here with you, and I hope that we'll see you at the next parent engagement evening. Stay safe, stay well, stay physically distanced, and please complete the survey. Thank you very much, and good night.